Great. Thank you to staying here to the end. We are the final panel of the day. We call it Moving to a Cleaner Energy Future and How We Get There. Of course, we've made already great progress, and you could actually say the future is already here. You know, over the last 10 years, all of the new power generation capacity added has been renewables and natural gas. They now comprise about 50% of all generation. On the renewable side, BlackRock, a member of ours, has shown that since 2011, 85% of the nation's private sector infrastructure investment has been in renewables. And of course, we've seen the cost reduction in solar and technology. We've seen natural gas at virtually all-time lows. So we see it's a natural gas renewable kind of environment right now. We've been asked to talk about the barriers to continued growth and the policy, financial, and technological and social changes needed to keep going and actually accelerate this. So we've got an expert panel of terrific speakers. We've got Alex Herrgott, actually in transition as we speak, just last week announced by the White House to be taking over the Federal Permitting Improvement Steering Council. And according to Alex, of course, he'll be continuing on with his CEQ functions, where he's played an important role in siting permitting there, and so he's going to be transitioning. We have Kelly Speakes-Backman, who is the CEO of the Energy Storage Association and a former Maryland Public Service Commissioner, with also an extensive background in our area, having worked at the Alliance to Save Energy, amongst other places. We're also joined by Jeff Stein, who's a policy advisor at API. We've been working closely with API and ACORE and some of the other groups involved in renewable and clean energy on energy resilience these days. So that's going to be interesting to talk about. And also finally, last but not least, we have Hannah Hunt, who's the Deputy Director of Electricity Policy and Demand at OEA. So I've asked each of our panelists just to take a couple minutes, briefly describe some priorities they're working on and get a couple of key points in the room, and then we're going to come back around for some questions. I would just note that, of course, our question style here is you have cards on your table. Please, as we go along, please fill them out if you have a question, and I'll do my best to ask them. So again, thanks for being here as we wrap up a great day. But Alex, over to you to get us started.
Sure, up at the...
Either way.
All right, well, I know I'm between you and your cocktails, so I'll make this quick. And although some of my colleagues, my former boss, Administrator Wheeler, and several others were here, and I'm sorry I wasn't able to be here earlier, I bring a good story, something that the little folks know has actually been done at the administration over the last 14 months, and something with one of my former idols on the Senate, my last 15 years, Environment and Public Works. Thanks for Senator Ayotte for inviting me to a dinner several months ago where I could talk about these in a more closed session. And now, as I've been traveling around the country, I get up in front of large groups of people and I say, I'm from Washington, D.C., and I'm here to help. And although that's a colloquialism, the reality is my position, the Associate Director for Infrastructure at the Council on Environmental Quality, has never existed before. It was created by this precedent recognition that one of the major impediments, one of the major barriers to a fostered, an effective clean energy and natural gas and any other mode-neutral energy development is the non-market risk that is perpetuated by the black box that is Washington, D.C. when you're actually trying to permit a project. Countries that are far greener than us, Canada, Australia, and the rest, build projects that are far more complicated than a natural gas pipeline or a base bait wind project or a desal project or a hydro project. It shouldn't take 9 years to build a project. You shouldn't have to go to 14 different agencies, abide by 26 different statutes, 9 executive orders, and hire a consultant to spend millions of dollars. No offense to some of you in this room. My job is to put you out of business. My job is to create a one-stop shop in D.C. where you get to come as someone that is putting tax dollars or private equity at risk, and to have a collaborator with a federal partner rather than an adversarial relationship where we force you to navigate this maze. We actually treat you like a customer. Because at the end of the day, the person that is paying is either a taxpayer or a ratepayer. And so my job at CEQ, and now with this new position at the Federal Permitting Council, is to ensure that we implement something called One Federal Decision. It started with an executive order August of last year, and it does something that is monumentally crazy. Stay with me here. At the beginning of a project, all relevant stakeholders meet including the federal family, and they chart out a timeline. Crazy, right? It's starting to get really crazy. Then, within that timeline, we develop milestones. When we get our draft environmental impact statement, when we get a record of decision. And keep in mind, a project may get its record of decision after it abides by the statutory requirements under NEPA. Then it has to look at 65 other permits post-record of decision. Then you're going back to the 14 agencies to say, now I have this rod, and now I have to negotiate not only with the 60 different permits, but all of the state delegated authorities that you're working with, let alone zoning and these other elements. It's crazy. So you have milestones within this timeline, and then elevation procedures within these milestones in which, if agencies don't act, there's actually a project adjudication tool. We give answers to project sponsors. And then at the end of the day, it's a definitive end and a definitive beginning. And as a result, what you're going to see from our friends at Blackstone and the rest is, as the non-market risk plummets, as we're giving certainty, predictability, and transparency to a process that hasn't had it since the 70s, you're actually going to see a renaissance that I think is above many people's expectations. So the way that I always say it is that there's a new sheriff in town. It's not sexy stuff, but it basically means all projects will get a record of decision within 2 years, regardless of how big, all relevant permits within 90 days, and that's it. And as long as we have a strong record and all stakeholders are at the front end, we are probably going to free up many of the dockets and many of the circuit, many district and circuit courts, because we won't have the judicial system making scientific determinations about projects. We will actually do the process as it was intended. We are not trying to force a yes in this administration. We're just trying to force a decision. And that's what my job is.
Thanks, Alex. And we'll come back around to some of these issues because this is very important to energy development here in the U.S., both renewable and conventional. Yep. Kelly, you have had a wealth of experience in the energy space, now advocating on behalf of really what is the topic du jour virtually everywhere when we think about energy and that's storage.
Yeah.
Welcome.
It's a lot of fun. And so I've taken a new take on that. I'm from D.C. and we're here to help. I say we're energy storage and we're here to help. We have, so my association is the Energy Storage Association. We are the national organization that advocates for energy storage in all its forms across all technologies. So most of you have heard of batteries, and the lithium-ion batteries specifically are some things that people mostly talk about. But we also represent members who participate in the thermal storage, or ice storage, or mechanical storage, flow batteries, all across that range. We have members that are also, we have almost 170 members, all across the value chain as well. So we have not just manufacturers and system integrators, but we have developers and IPPs and utilities within our membership. So we have an entire spectrum of this energy ecosystem. And our main mission is to support energy storage for a more resilient, a more efficient, a more sustainable, and a more affordable grid. There's a lot packed in there, but and I'm happy to talk to you about it. But I did want to just give a quick sort of summary of some of the things that we do in policy, because I think that addresses some of the barriers that we're here to talk about today. We're here to provide our members with access, with competition, and with value. In access, there are regulations that actually don't allow storage to participate at certain state levels. In the competition area, there are long-term planning processes that are undertaken in a way that does not actually include energy storage, which is a shame. I think it's not purposeful, but it's just sort of never been contemplated that energy storage is an affordable option, and so it's been cut off. And then the last part is about value. Energy storage can provide values all along the markets, both at wholesale and at retail level. We have ancillary services that we can offer, but it happens to be that the way the system is set up, both on the bulk wholesale system and on the retail system, is that you have to first say whether you're generation, transmission, or distribution. Well, energy storage can be all three of that. And so our jobs as the Energy Storage Association is to break down these barriers to allow energy storage simply to compete, simply to be included, and simply to allow us to make the grid work better.
Great, thanks, Kelly. Jeff, you're at API now. This is and you focus on power issues over there, and we've all been collaborating with regard to the issue of resilience, actually in response to the administration's push on coal and nuclear, actually arguing for markets and competition and so on. Jeff, over to you to provide some opening comments.
Sure. Well, thanks, Todd. My name is Jeff Stein. I'm a policy advisor within API's Market Development Group. API's Market Development Group is a relatively new part of the Institute, which I think tracks a lot of what's happened in the energy marketplace. Our role, my role, and the role of my colleagues within market development is to work to promote the clean, efficient, secure, and sustainable use of natural gas in domestic markets and also internationally. And I know this panel, we're going to talk a little bit about the future and what we see next. But before I get there, before I make any points on that, I want to just emphasize the unique position we are in today and the significant progress we've all made in the past decade. So I've been working on energy policy and national security issues in and out of DC for about a decade now. And I think one of the common threads throughout Clean Energy Week from all different stakeholders and policymakers from different parties is just how different the energy landscape is today compared to what it was 5 years ago and certainly 10 years ago. We look at the power sector domestically. CO2 emissions from the power sector are at near 30-year lows. From about 1990 till 2005, CO2 emissions in the power sector were consistently increasing. And since then, there's been about a 28% drop since 2005 till about the end of 2016. Now, according to EIA, 60% of that has been due to natural gas displacing other generating assets in the market. Natural gas has been the foundational fuel for the cleaner energy environment we are in today. And as much as natural gas can power a cleaner future domestically, when we look to the future, there's significant opportunity for American clean energy leadership abroad. The conversations surrounding gas trade, LNG, in the context of US policy was almost exclusively imports, not even that long ago. And today, as my colleague mentioned this morning in his introduction of Commissioner Chatterjee, the US is poised to become one of the global leaders in LNG exports. And so when we look at the global scale and global electricity and global power and where we see energy demand growth in the near, medium, and long term, it's primarily in these non-OECD markets. International organizations understand this, and they are looking to see how they can balance their objectives for energy access, addressing energy poverty, sustainability, particularly as these mega cities and second-tier cities grow and demand for electricity grows, and coupling that with sustainability goals. And so in the same way that natural gas has provided this foundation and will continue to provide this foundation for clean, resilient, abundant, secure power domestically, we as a nation have the opportunity today to be leaders globally and use our abundant resource to help power the world in a more sustainable way looking forward.
Thanks, Jeff. Hannah, of course, wind is in many places the cheapest form of new power, and we've seen tremendous growth. How do you see how do you see the challenges and opportunities looking ahead for wind power?
Right, thanks, Todd. And I'll adjust this a bit. Certainly here to talk about barriers in the future, but I do want to start by saying that the wind is certainly on a strong trajectory, and there are quite a number of reasons why we're expecting to continue to grow into the future. I do work for the American Wind Energy Association. We are the main trade association for wind in the U.S. We're representing about 1,000 member companies, representing project developers, owner-operators, manufacturers, a growing number of utilities and corporations buying wind as well, focusing on education, federal and state policy advocacy. And in the past, I would say, decade, we've seen quite a shift and quite a growth in the industry across the U.S. For context, we're at about 90 gigawatts of wind across the country now in 41 states. That's about a little over 50,000 turbines. In terms of market drivers, we've seen the cost of wind come down by 2/3 in the past 8 years, and we're continuing to see technological advances that are really opening up new areas of the country for additional development. Certainly, we're seeing that utilities and Fortune 500 companies are both recognizing the value of wind, and we're also very excited to see the offshore wind industry starting to take off now. Out of those 50,000 turbines that I mentioned, we currently have 5 operating offshore right now, but we do have gigawatts in the pipeline now. Again, a combination of those market drivers and strong state policy leadership as well. So we do certainly have a lot going for us, but to keep this going, we do need to pair these strengths with continued improvements, and particularly touching on market design, transmission, and policy. A lot of the work on market design we would be in alignment with Kelly on. Seeing the grid transform over the past decade really requires an update to the market design rules and systems, really just to ensure that the true value of all energy sources and the value they're bringing to the grid are being compensated for and being recognized. So quite a lot of work to do there. And when it comes to transmission, it's really about investing in transmission so you can get the lowest cost resources from the point of generation to those that are consuming it. And that's not just an issue for wind; that's an issue for all energy sources. And something that I think a lot of people can agree on when it comes to modernizing our infrastructure, particularly the grid. And happy to touch more on those topics as well.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Hannah. A great first round. Let's go a little deeper here. Let's touch on policy generally. Policy really is fundamentally the signal to the market on where to put resources, and energy markets are fully a function of policy, as we well know. Monopoly utility is a policy choice. Alex, you play a key role on the infrastructure side, especially siting and permitting, and what the federal government can do to promote, continued development of energy resources. Maybe go a little deeper on, infrastructure. That's seen as a place of bipartisanship. And what about the administration's proposal? Where is that out? What do you expect to see?
So we're a tale of two sort of panelists here. We have one that's more focused on the capacity and the demand and the spot markets and storage and what the energy mix would be. But as far as I'm concerned, I've got about 26 major pipelines that I'm responsible for making sure get over the finish line, whether that be Mountain Valley or Access or Bay State Wind. We can't have another Cape Wind scenario where it wasn't well vetted with stakeholders. And I don't mind. we have to make sure that the public process is as transparent and as open as possible, but you can't interject using rhetorical tools and legacy statutes to stop a project that has gone through the statutory requirements. And that is really what fundamentally I'm charged with. We have folks putting capital at risk to build energy projects that are being stopped unnecessarily outside of what was intended by the original statute, whether that is with Constitution Pipeline, whether that's with a Millennium Bulk Terminal out in Oregon. Policy aside, I'm very serious about the fact that CEQ and the Permitting Council has looked at the process as agnostically and with an energy neutral mindset. And I think that when you're talking to Wall Street, they are scared to death about the prognosis of being in a quagmire of a 7 or 8 year permitting process, only to then be in court for another 4 years with an injunction, where the process now from those that are both NIMBY or are not necessarily phased into what the energy mix is to insanguinate projects and prevent them from actually getting permitted. So my job on helping to develop the President's infrastructure plan was to figure out the funding side, to figure out a way in which we would address all non-federal public infrastructure to ensure that more skin was in the game from local entities that actually own the assets, because the federal government, other than Tennessee Valley Authority, Bonneville Dam, and the rest, doesn't actually own any infrastructure in this country. It's all owned by counties, states, and locals. We need to remember that. The 4 million miles of roads, the 53,000 water systems, the only quasi-governmental ownership is from counties on the rural co-op interest. But to answer your question, there's the funding side and the permitting side. We can't continue to put more money into an infrastructure package without actually figuring out how we deliver it, and how we give those expectations to those putting capital at risk. We should be able to build major roads and infrastructure within 2 years. If you look at the permitting dashboard, of which I am the executive director, we have 26 multi-billion-dollar projects that are on there that have been sitting on the shelf for about 5 to 10 years, just wasting dollars. And so it's my job to get those over the finish line by actually injecting the appropriate amount of transparency and working within as close to the statutes as was intended to get these things over the finish line. I think what that market signal is going to send when I talk about the non-market risk reducing allows for a cheaper debt and equity market to allow a lot of these riskier projects to develop, especially as we redo half of the transmission in this country that's about 80 years old and far beyond its useful life, and especially out in the West. When we look at resilient circular infrastructure and the rest, you got to have a federal government that's going to give you the certainty that we're going to partner with you and actually help you get your project built, as opposed to dancing around the margins, falling into the default, which is, oh my gosh, environmental process is going to take years. It doesn't have to be that way, and that's something that I think will outlive this administration. Yeah,
there's a lot here that we can go into, but wish we had more time, but we can touch. Thanks for that. Kelly, policy is critical to storage. Storage is a key point in our infrastructure development to capture the full role that storage offers. I wonder if you can share a few comments on the key policy issues, whether they're tax, whether they're electricity market, or even infrastructure, financing development kinds of issues.
Yes. Yeah. There we go. So in terms of energy storage as infrastructure, there are multiple opportunities if you were to put energy storage in just the transmission bucket. And I think actually FERC 841 Order 841 that was issued unanimously in February and sort of outlines this is that energy storage can play in the transmission side, at the distribution level, and at the generation level, but it is all and none of the above at the same time. And so in terms of infrastructure and transmission, it can offset at a much lower cost, a much more efficient cost structure, the upgrades of transmission that needs to happen. From integrating renewables, which is an important policy direction that our country has taken and specific states have taken. From that perspective, to be able to balance out either oversupply or the non-dispatchability of certain resources, energy storage is there as well. In terms of the distribution level and being able to help support congestion areas. Those are all three things that they can do, but can you imagine having this barrier, which is what FERC 841 takes on, is having a barrier that sort of says you have to play in just transmission or just distribution or just generation. It's just, you're kind of cutting off one of the legs of a three-legged stool when you can have it all in one asset. And so that's what the RTOs are working through, and that's what's really exciting. It was a watershed moment for us, so we're pretty excited.
One quick question. We just had Senator Heinrich here. What's your prognosis on the Heller-Heinrich storage tax credit?
Oh, it's going through.
And I was talking with Senator Hatch's finance guy. Sat at our table last night at the dinner. Said they're going to be pushing on extenders in the lame duck.
It's pretty exciting. Storage is there to support renewables, but we've had terrific support from both OEA and SEIA, the Solar Energy Industry Association, to allow storage to stand on its own for the ITC for the remainder and to hold out at the same level. And why wouldn't you? Why wouldn't you allow storage to participate in that if it's going to be helping to lower costs for consumers at the end?
Great. Jeff, your perspective on key policy priorities these days. Electricity markets are front and center. Tax a little bit behind us because of the tax bill. How do what's the most important policy issue you guys are facing at API?
Sure.
On the gas front.
So I guess at a high level, right, I'm seeing this from a market development perspective, how to allow natural gas to continue to compete for market access in the electric power sector domestically and also globally. But I think one important point that I want to raise about really the story of the growth of natural gas for power generation in the last 10 years is it was driven by market fundamentals and economic fundamentals. There was no policy that the industry pushed for to specifically help the gas industry. And I think that as we look ahead, the issues that we face and confront are any sorts of interruption or too much interruption in the market to allow gas, but also other emerging technologies, renewable storage, any other new energy technologies to compete fairly for consumers. And much of the growth in natural gas, which had been led by market fundamentals, is also led by consumer demand and what the consumers want. The electric utility industry, primarily a lot of the growth had come from power generation in competitive markets, but now we're seeing a lot of utilities which for years had been reliant on a lot of old coal assets. They're trying to decrease their CO2 and to increase their sustainability. And they are turning to renewables, and they are turning to significant investments in natural gas. So I would say our policy focus now from a market development perspective, in addition to the resilience issue, we've worked with many of you on that as well, is really just allowing new clean energy technologies, whether it's gas, renewables, storage, carbon capture, whatever they may be, to compete fairly in competitive but also vertically integrated markets.
Thanks, Jeff. Hannah, of course, the PTC is set to sunset after next year. Renewables will be the only energy resources without tax incentives. Got those issues, and of course, still a lot of work to do on integration, transmission. What might be next? What's going to be key to the growth? Of course, costs have come down, can compete without incentives and policy, but policy always does matter.
Certainly, and when it comes to the PTC, we usually say that we tax reformed ourselves, and that's certainly true, and it is set to phase out in the next couple of years. And but when you start to zoom out a little bit and you start to look across the country, you start to look at, are all sources of energy getting fair market rules? Are they being given the development process and the permitting process that allows them to bring a project online in time and to get the financing they need? Is there adequate transmission available to access the resources that are needed? There's no, it's a long list of issues to address. And when it comes to policy, there's a number of ways, of course, to address those. At the state level, continuing to work on state level permitting or state level RPS policies. Looking up to the federal level, we've been engaged in plenty of processes like NEPA reform. And I do just, though, want to go back to something Jeff mentioned about consumer preference and customer demand, because while a lot of the discussion is framed up in terms of the policy lens, I can't overstate how much the market factors have had an effect on renewable deployment and what the consumer is wanting. So a lot of this growth is going to be driven by the federal government, regulators, the state government, utilities listening to the consumer and being able to respond to that. You could look at examples even like electric vehicles and the well-documented research that shows that EV drivers want renewable energy, clean energy to be powering their cars, and showing the ways that EVs can bring additional grid benefits and can work with things like clean energy and storage too. So being able to listen to that and use their voice, I think, can help in a lot of the policy work that we're doing.
Well, we're getting the signal, and from on high, Heather. And of course, we are the last panel. We do have a reception after. So I would just like to say, thanks for an excellent discussion. Alex, Hannah, Jeff, and Kelly, great job. And we'll be around, so if there are any other questions you might have, we can answer those and engage with you in discussion over a drink. Thank you.